As soon as I learned about the capstone, I knew that I wanted to talk about engaging students with hands-on activities. My 8th grade teacher, Mr. W., was the one person who really inspired me to become a teacher, and he did this by teaching so much of his curriculum using hands-on activities, inquiry, and even mini field trips. So much of what he taught that year sticks out in my mind because I was an active participant in my learning. Whether it was acting something out, building a model, drawing a picture, or doing an experiment, Mr. W. always had us doing activities that went along with our readings or with his lectures, and to this day those hands-on activities still stick out in my mind. That's why my capstone is titled Hands On, Minds On, Teaching to Engage Students. Since beginning my journey towards teaching, the way that Mr. W. taught me back in 8th grade has stuck out in my mind and has inspired the work that I have put towards my competency statement, which is that I am competent at effectively integrating engaging hands-on activities that enable students to make deeper personal connections, strengthen concept understanding, and activate long-term memory. This falls under the theme Theories of Learning and Their Roles in Teaching. When thinking about my competency statement, I had two main questions. What are effective teaching strategies to engage students and allow them to make personal connections with the curriculum content? And why is actively participating with the curriculum so important for long-term learning? These questions stuck out in my mind because on the road to becoming a teacher, I knew I wanted to use hands-on learning instead of just lectures and worksheets, but I wasn't exactly sure where to start out. This feeling of not knowing what to do didn't last long, because as soon as I got into math block, I was introduced to countless manipulatives. We learned about making arrays to show multiplication, using tangrams for patterns or geometry, and the importance of teaching number sense with the number cubes. This led me to my first lesson that I taught during math block. It was a lesson about classifying triangles, and what better way to teach classifying triangles than by having students actually do it themselves. So, to start the lesson, I gave each pair of students at their desks a Ziploc bag that was filled with construction paper triangles just like these. I said, I will start out my lesson by having students take out their triangles and work in pairs to sort triangles in any manner they see fit. While the students sort, I will walk around the room and observe how they are organizing them. I had no explanation as to why I was doing this, other than I knew I wanted my lesson to be hands-on. As I went on to teach the lesson, I referred back to the triangle manipulatives in my lesson plan, but I did not have the students continue to use them. I could have done so much more with these manipulatives as I lectured, but since I was still learning how to engage my students, I failed to use the hands-on activity to its fullest potential. In my reflection for this lesson, I mentioned that more and more students were raising their hands and volunteering answers and wanting to write up answers on the board. By that, I kind of had an idea of how important hands-on activities were for student engagement, comprehension, and memory, but I was still growing in that knowledge and learning how to correctly implement activities as a teacher. Later that semester, I reviewed the video of myself teaching the triangle lesson, and in that reflection I said, as I watched my students on the video, I noticed how some of the students who in the past didn't seem to care about math were more interested when I gave them the manipulatives. I will use this knowledge in the future to spend more time planning short games or little activities to include in almost every math lesson so that the students can be engaged and have fun with math, even if the base concepts aren't so fun. The idea of how some of my students lit up at the use of triangle hands-on activities stuck in my mind, and I began planning these activities into many more of my lessons. My next piece of evidence comes from my science methods practicum, almost a full 2 years later. In science, we talked a lot about science inquiry and how the students can connect with the lessons if they are actively participating and coming up with their own questions. I was also exposed to a new 5E lesson plan. The E stood for Engage, Explore, Explain, Extend, and Evaluate. These 5 headings fit perfectly with my goal of meeting all students and turning them on with hands-on activities. Using this lesson plan structure, I plan a lesson about identifying tree parts and understanding what they do for the tree. Unlike my math lesson plan, I clearly stated that students will come to better understand trees through a series of hands-on activities that will help them make connections to teacher instruction. I went on to implement these hands-on activities in the Explore phase of the 5E lesson plan. I had my students touching and looking at the different tree parts so that they could make their own connections as well as come up with questions and inquiries about trees. In the extension phase, my students showed their knowledge that they gained about trees by making their own trees and labeling the different parts that they just finished exploring. This was not only a hands-on activity, but also a way for students who learn by making or doing to succeed. Finally, in the evaluation or assessment stage, I had my students play a game using dry erase magnets to label the different tree parts. The amount of hands-on activities that I included in this one lesson show that I intentionally was planning for hands-on activity to be the main mode that my students used to learn about tree parts. As I went through my lesson, I was still learning and trying out new ways to make my lesson hands-on, but my evidence of planning grew from just adding an activity into a lesson, like I did when I was trying to do my triangle lesson, to planning the entire lesson around a variety of hands-on activities, then connecting these activities to each other, as well as to the information that I was presenting to my students in other forms. Once I moved on to student teaching, I was able to practice everything that I learned and planned at my time at UNL in a whole new classroom setting. By the end of first quarter at student teaching, my cooperating teacher let me take free reign of the social studies unit. She said that she was tired of lectures and readings and a packet of worksheets that someone had given her years past, and essentially gave me free reign to plan, change, and do anything I wanted in the Native American unit, so long as it met the standards and the students would be able to know enough to pass the assessment. I knew I wanted to make my lesson as hands-on as possible and as different from the lectures and worksheets that they did in years past, but in an inclusion classroom with 23 different students with varying levels of ability, this proved to be a bit more of a struggle. I finally settled on having my students work together in groups for the majority of the 3-week unit. From the very start in my lesson plan, I stated that inquiry and questioning are keys for more interactive and personal social studies experience. For that reason, most of the work that I presented in this lesson is meant to be done in a whole group or small group setting. The hands-on activities will allow students to connect the past to the present and connect their everyday lives. This should be the main focus of discussion whenever possible. This is not only a Nebraska state standard, but will help students to really put themselves in the time and place that they are studying and even remember the concepts long term. From then on, I started to pair a hands-on activity with every concept in the Native American unit. The first lesson was Native American homes, and for this lesson I had my students draw a teepee and earth lodge, and then draw and color what they thought would be inside it as I read them the information from the social studies book. My students then went on to write facts that they learned on their teepees and earth lodges. This worked very well with this group of students as they are very artistic. The next thing I did was have the students use meter sticks and rope to measure around the classroom how big and how tall a teepee or earth lodge would be. This really helped students visualize the Native American homes that they were studying. For the next lesson in my unit, the students were studying Native American tribes. For this lesson, I chose to use a hands-on activity that involved technology to really motivate my students. I split up my students into tribes and gave each tribe a social studies book and iPads. Using these tools, they researched in depth their specific Plains Indian tribe. Then they worked to compile the information into a digital poster, which they created on the iPads. Every student had a chance to interact with the information, as well as the iPad, to create their final product, which they then shared with the class. They were all so proud of what they created that I believe it is an activity that they will not soon forget. My UNL supervisor was able to observe this lesson, and some of her comments really reinforced for me the benefits of hands-on learning. She said that all groups were immediately engaged in the project, the groups were enjoying the learning project with the iPads, and the constant engagement equaled continuous learning. After a few other activities, such as making their own buffalo hide out of a paper bag and writing with Native American symbols, the students concluded their unit by making and presenting one of the 2 Native American homes that we studied. Finally, to conclude the unit, students made and presented one of the 2 Native American homes that we studied. They were tasked with making the scene that showed all they knew about Native American lives and then tell about the teepee or the earth lodge that they created, what it was used for, and why it was important. This hands-on activity let all students participate in their own way and was a great way to show all that they had learned. After all the activities, I am proud to say that all the students were able to produce meaningful final projects and oral presentations. The test results further showed the effects of the hands-on learning in this unit because the class ended up with a 94% average. I'm finding that the more time I spend in classrooms, the more time I'm getting to practice inserting meaningful and varied hands-on activities that supplement my curriculum and benefit my students. After going through my journey of implementing hands-on activities in classrooms, I have had a few big takeaways. First, in my developmental psychology class, I learned that Vygotsky stated that children learn through playing. Hands-on learning can often be much like playing, and interacting with material in a new way helps students to get involved actively and participate in their learning. In the 3 classrooms that my evidence came from, I saw my students light up. They were laughing and talking to their friends about what they were doing when they were using hands-on learning. The triangle manipulatives made math a little more fun, the tree projects that the kids made were something that they were excited to take home and show their parents, and the Native American projects helped my students know enough to imagine themselves in the Native American times. Next, hands-on learning involves all students, even those who do not typically enjoy school. Since hands-on learning is a completely different way of gaining information, almost all students will be willing, if not eager, to participate in building, organizing, creating, imagining, or acting out the concept that they are learning. Educational consultant Eric Herman confirms this when he says, activities encourage students to learn through participation instead of repetition. I saw this in the classroom because as soon as I presented my students with something new, whether it be the iPad or scissors and glue, they were instantly interested in what I was doing and worked through the entire class period to finish the project. I even had students asking if they could work longer to perfect their projects. Lastly, I have seen that students are more likely to take pride in their work and remember it if they had a big part in constructing their own learning. Hands-on learning allows students to do or create something memorable that will well surpass the apathy that they might feel from constantly listening to lectures or filling out worksheets. A gamer activity will automatically be more interesting and more memorable to a student, and any product or project is something that students will want to keep long term. I experienced this when making the digital posters about Native American tribes. Most of my students were constantly asking if I could print out their posters so that they could keep them and show them to their parents. They were also beyond excited when I projected their posters on the smartboards and let them show their work to their peers. This pride in their poster proved to me that they put effort into their learning about the Great Plain tribes. Finally, I will leave you with this quote by the Chinese teacher, politician, and philosopher Confucius. Tell me and I will forget. Show me and I may remember. Involve me and I will understand. I think this perfectly sums up what I have learned when using hands-on activities with children in the classrooms. Looking back over my project, I learned a few very meaningful things. The first is that not all students learn in the same way. Secondly, I learned that using hands-on activities can foster deeper and long-term understanding of the subject if the teacher plans and implements them correctly. And finally, hands-on activities are an easy way to engage students and get their minds turned on to learn. I learned a great many things from this project, but I know there are also things that I still need to learn. One of these things is strategies to individualize activities for varying levels of ability or different groups of students. I know that not every group of students will interact with the hands-on activities like my students did this year. Another thing that I would like to learn is how to implement meaningful hands-on activities in the areas of reading and writing. I have not yet had much practice with this. And finally, I would like to learn new activities to continue to engage students as well as to capture the attention of reluctant learners. Going forward, when thinking about how to identify what I still need to learn, I think one of the ways that I will really do this is through trial and error. Does the activity work, and do the students really understand, or was it just a fun game? Another way that I would identify what I still need to learn is after implementing each lesson, I will assess how the students reacted to the hands-on activity, whether it deepened their understanding of the subject at hand. I will also talk to my cooperating teacher and my supervisor to get new ideas as well as look for feedback on lessons that I have already implemented. Finally, I will constantly be collaborating with other teachers and administrators in my building. Their years of experience can help me to create more meaningful lessons that have already been tried and proven in the past.